Hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel, which is about producing in the time of pandemics. Probably a pretty new panel, but one that I think will provide a lot of insight to everyone in the world of production. So I think first we'll go around and just quickly introduce ourselves, say where we are, if you want to say where you live in normal times versus where you're quarantining, that's great, and what you're currently working on. So I am Danielle Steinberg. I am in New York, but about to drive to Detroit, Michigan to see my family tomorrow. And I am the digital lead at Nature. Tiffany, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Tiffany McNeil. I'm a director, creative director, shooter, producer, editor. I do a lot of things. Right now I'm creating some shows, a show for Vice. And I'm in Washington, D.C. and quarantining in Washington, D.C.
Great. Allie, do you want to go next?
Sure, I'm Ali Christos and I'm a development executive for Red Rock Films International. We're a natural history production company based in Johannesburg. So I'm here in Johannesburg and I generally live here. The pandemic hasn't really changed that.
Great. Ariel?
Hi, I'm Ariel Nescone. I'm a production designer and art director. I live in Los Angeles, but I'm currently in Atlanta art directing on a Netflix movie.
Awesome. Adam, you want to go next?
Sure, I'm Adam Cole. I am a science reporter and producer and an animator at times. I currently work for Vox on their Netflix show Explained, and I live and am quarantined in Washington, D.C.
Great. And Anita, if you can finish us out.
Sure thing. Hi, I'm Anita Ackhurst. I'm head of programming over at Seeker, which is a digital media company focused on science storytelling. And we're currently working on a couple of series. One is a natural history one called Rewild, and another one is us kind of relaunching our science-focused documentary series called Focal Point.
Great. So I think we'll jump right in. I'm going to ask these first few questions as like multiple choice questions, but there's no right answer. There's really only one wrong answer for each one, sort of like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And I think because, Anita, because you went last, let's have you go first. So the question is about using other resources when you're forced to sort of shift during times like a pandemic. What are some other ways to source content if you're stuck in one spot? Is it A, use stock footage? B, pivot to audio or podcasting? C, try new platforms or formats. Nature is trying TikTok now, which is a whole other separate issue. Or D, give up.
I think everything from the above except for give up. I think for us, when the pandemic first hit, we had a ton of programming actually that we had deadlines for. We'd got funding for series from Facebook, from YouTube. And so it just kind of forced us to rethink the formats that we'd originally ideated on. A lot of them relied on us going out in the field and doing original footage. But what ended up happening was us actually working with the hosts that we were using and seeing whether they would be interested in filming remotely. And filming themselves. And in a lot of cases, actually, we found that their partners or the people that they were living with actually had some camera experience. So we were able to direct them remotely. And actually, our director of photography did a really good job of training and working with them to get a good shot set up. We definitely used stock footage as well. And then we also kind of used footage from the hosts themselves and animation. One of the examples, I think the best example probably of this is our series Tusk to Tales. We worked with a veterinarian who'd done some work for Animal Planet in the past. His name is Evan, and he actually had a lot of footage from the field of him kind of handling some of the animals that we were talking about in the series, which was all about kind of animal physiology. And his partner was a video journalist. So it worked out really well that we were able to kind of shoot him doing his stand-ups from home, and then also use some of his own footage to show what the animals that we were talking about on the actual show.
And Adam, you at Vox are still producing and publishing the Netflix series during all of this, right? You've even shifted to talking about it. So if you want to chime in with anything.
Yeah, I mean, that all sounds very familiar. We did a mini series, as you were saying, right out the gate about the pandemic. And that was definitely a challenge. Luckily, the show is already pretty animation heavy and archival heavy. And so we sort of just leaned a little bit more into that than before. So we didn't do any filming ourselves. We attempted a couple different sort of filming kits that we sent, and these were public health professionals, so less likely to have a spouse or partner who was good with a Canon 5D or something like that. And so there was a lot of interviews where we would send them a kit with a little microphone that they could attach to their cell phone, or we sent some people an iPad. And even with the most rigorous of instructions, people still sent us a vertical video that. So it was sometimes a failed experiment, but I think we felt like for that miniseries specifically, it was fine. Like, people will roll with you for something like that, especially in the early days of what's been going on. And so we just leaned into the grainy nature of the footage. And then, yeah, we had an episode. Usually I would say it's like the episodes are like 20 minutes long, maybe like 7 minutes for animation. One of the pandemic miniseries episodes was 15 minutes of animation. So we sort of took some of the resources that were going towards, would normally go towards filming, and hired some extra animators.
Yeah, I think reallocating funds is really smart. Like, sort of lean into what you can do versus, save money on what you can't. And then the other thing you said, I think is really important, is about failure. Like, you just have to try new things. And we'll get a little bit into that later. But the last person I want to check in with on this question is Ariel, because what she does is pretty different than the rest of us, like production design. It's sort of kind of have to be on set, and you've worked on some really cool productions like The Lion King and Tenet. So if you want to tell us a little bit, like, how your industry is pivoting.
I mean, it definitely took a turn. It's definitely very different because it is, the production is very physical. You can't really just, you can shift from the physical, to the more animated or to the more digital, but that essentially starts to eliminate the physical, as opposed to us doing something different. But so a lot of it had to do with just, waiting until procedures and practices could kind of become in place for us to be able to go back to work. There were some things like, like working on a bigger production, the art department does have months and months of pre-production. So there were a lot of shows that were at that phase that, could kind of take a step back and have people work from home and keep progressing. But again, you kind of get to a point where you're almost at a limit of how much pre-production you can do before you actually have to get into physical production. So there's definitely that. And yeah, I mean, it was just like a lot of concerns and a lot of discussion, especially between all the union members, about what people were willing to risk or what people were willing, just all those agreements that had to come together before we could really get back to work in what we were doing. People started to kind of do little experiments where you would have like a really small crew doing something. Like, I guess for us, we had to be out of LA because LA, you weren't allowed to film in. So I went to Joshua Tree for a few days for a really, really small shoot, so that we kind of like practice some safety practices, but like outdoors. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of just been a long road, and now we're finally getting back to it, and finding ourselves in quite a different situation than we were in before.
Yeah.
But we're figuring it
Seems
out
like
every
it's
day.
still an ongoing experiment.
Absolutely. I mean, we just have to be flexible with it, because they're discovering new things all the time, or deciding new and different rules that would benefit the whole crew. And so we kind of just have to go with the flow a little bit there, but
yeah,
managing.
Makes sense. Okay, question number 2, and Tiffany and Allie, if you have other things to add to the first question, go for it when you answer this one. This one's especially for you two. So the inability to travel means we can't just pack up and film wherever we want, like we're used to doing. Do we A, use local talent rather than travel and diversify the industry? Do we B, just reduce crew size? C, figure out new and innovative ways and technology to shoot in these places? Or D, travel anyway, screw the restrictions? Tiff, if you want to start us off.
Sure. Well, once again, all of these are viable options except for the screw the guidelines and procedures and just go catch coronavirus and spread it. Probably not a good idea. For me, coronavirus has been really difficult for so many people. But if there is a silver lining for me in this line of work, is that I got to lean into something that I do anyways as much as I can, that I really believe in. And that is access the talent that exists in all the places where we're telling stories, right? So often, because I guess we could, especially in natural history or science storytelling, we parachute ourselves into these other places, and the places that we think are cool, and we bring our whole crews and we tell the stories that we think are important there. But we forget that so many people in those spaces are brilliant storytellers. They are telling story already better than we could because they know those stories. So what happened with coronavirus is it sort of forced some people, or just like really gave you the opportunity to have it as a first option to say, hey, who is telling stories in these brilliant communities, right? Who is telling stories that I wouldn't have found if I Googled or if I just shot over there for a week? And how can we work together to extend the lens of the stories that we tell? So I think that that's great, and that's twofold, right? It's amazing how many things become accessible when certain people don't no longer have access to them. So when we talk about, in the past, maybe just even a year ago, we would say, oh, we should make film festivals accessible to everybody, even people who can't travel to the film festival. And people would say, oh, that's too hard, or it costs too much money, that's impossible. But the moment that film festivals, that art exhibits and museum exhibits, that certain media became inaccessible to certain people who it was accessible to, it's all become so accessible. I've learned so much. I've consumed so much media. I've looked at museum exhibits I never would have gotten a chance to see, or participate in film festivals that I never would have been able to participate in, because it's now all readily accessible. If it is accessible now, it could have been accessible before. But instead of looking at the past, let's look to the future. Hopefully now, everything will get sorted out. There'll be a vaccine or a cure, and we'll be able to get back to doing the work that we love to do in some of the ways that we used to. But hopefully the accessibility that we've found a way to create for everybody, and the collaborative nature in which we're telling stories now, respecting everybody's right to tell story, hopefully that that continues. It will absolutely continue for me, but hopefully it continues, in our field, even after this all gets sorted out. So I think that that's a beautiful silver lining, if there is one.
Yeah, I love what you've said. And, you were on a panel at Jackson last year with our friend Sarah Joseph from Nat Geo,
Yeah.
and you guys talked about the word empowerment in filmmaking.
Mm-hmm.
You want to go to these other countries and empower the people there. And it's like, they don't need your, you know, they don't need your empowerment. They don't need your approval. It's like they already have all that. Just give them the voice to say it. Allie, I know you have thoughts on this too.
Yeah, just kind of adding to what Tiffany said, I think she has some fantastic points there. I think, you know, in the natural history space, there's so many incredible opportunities. And with this pandemic, it's kind of really opened our eyes to the state of the industry at the moment. We have 2 productions. One that was happening when the pandemic started, that we were filming in South Africa, and actually limiting it to a small crew was hugely helpful. So we went from, I think it was a crew of about 20 people altogether, it was quite a big production, to just 4 people. And we actually got some of our best footage and our best behavior during that time. At the same time, we have a project where we're filming Wolverine on the border of Finland and Russia. And we have 1 cameraman there, and he's getting extraordinary stuff. So there really is a great opportunity in the natural history film space, as opposed to, you know, maybe other film sections where you have these larger crews, where you really can narrow it down. And I think that that's a great opportunity that we need to look at. In terms of local talent, I do think it is easier said than done. It's such an incredible opportunity in these places. In South Africa, you have incredible organizations like NUF that have young and emerging local filmmakers that can tell incredible stories. And I feel like we just kind of sticking to the same tiny pool of talent. And I think that that's hugely problematic. So we tend to have the same, you know, filmmakers from Europe, from the UK, and from the US, and I tend to see, you know, the same people. We tend to use the same cameramen for every project. And I think that there are so many other opportunities, especially throughout Africa. And I feel like we have become quite complacent with that. And we probably need to look at the industry as a whole and see, you know, what can we actually do to make sure that we're nurturing the talent in those places. It's not saying, you know, we're going to go to this place and empower them. I think that that was a great point that you did make, Danielle. I think that, you know, what we do have to do is we have to just be inclusive. It's ultimately about going to these places and actually making an effort to have them in your productions, and not just getting complacent with it and using the same people over and over again. But yeah, I think that it really has opened our eyes, this pandemic. And I think that there's a lot more that we can do in this space, especially as young filmmakers.
Great points. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on that. If not, we can move to the next question. That is for all of you. So we'll go through everybody again. And I think you all might have different answers this time. It's about measuring how can you measure if your content is succeeding in times of pandemic? I mean, people are online more, but are they watching your stuff more? Are they watching it the same amount of time? So how can you measure if your content during this time is succeeding? Do you A, set new goals and metrics of success? B, ask your audience what they want to see, produce what they want. C, it doesn't matter as long as you're still producing content. Or D, it's impossible to measure. And the bonus question is, how can you tweak your content if you think it's not performing well? So let's start with Adam.
Oh boy, I was hoping you wouldn't come to me first. It is tricky for us because we don't have a lot of, we don't have a very good open communication with our audience, because it's all mediated through this shadowy Netflix, our overlords who don't really share a lot of data with us, or they're very afraid of their data becoming public about any of their viewership, it seems. And so for us, it's not really a tool we have. Even I'm sure they have demographic data and stuff like that, but we don't have access to that. So it is very difficult. We hear from them what they think the niche that they're hoping that we will fill. So I actually spend some time, it's not very. I don't think this is a very good way to do this, but because of this blind spot, I spend some time looking at Twitter after one of our episodes comes out, just to see sort of what the reaction is, and see. Of course, Twitter is such a limited community, though, that it's not great. So yeah, I don't think I'm the best person to answer this question, really.
So you would say that you sort of search for qualitative responses versus like quantitative, how many people viewed it, or
Yeah, and
like
yeah,
that.
I mean, there's not really a good way. It's sort of just trusting the team that we're with is how we make decisions. And I wish that there was more, that we had access to more sort of audience feedback.
Yeah, that's tough when you aren't really in control of that.
Mm-hmm.
Anitha, what would you say?
Yeah, we can go pretty deep into into all of the digital metrics that we measure. You know, on most of the major platforms, we're looking at things like views, watch time, view duration, and specifically, I think we look for places where audience is dropping off. But we also, I think, especially during times of pandemic, we're really looking at, you know, packaging and introduction visuals, mainly because it's so noisy right now, you know, with so much going on with COVID and also the election as well and everything surrounding that. And, you know, right now where I am in Northern California, you know, what some of our biggest audiences here, and we've also got wildfires happening. So there's a lot going on. And I think for us, even just kind of focusing on packaging, that front door, that entry to our content is really critical. So some of the things that we've had to tweak has definitely been packaging, has definitely been intro visuals, making sure that we're really being very grabby with the first kind of 30 seconds of our storytelling, and putting our strongest visuals up the front. I'd say we also have been a lot more focused on finding partners to share our content. People maybe who, and brands as well, who, you know, maybe we don't have the audience that they do for a particular piece of content, but we can kind of organize shares and expand our audience that way. So finding audiences that are interested in the type of content you're making, I think is also pretty critical.
Would you say that any platform more than the others, like YouTube or Facebook, have changed more drastically or been better for you in terms of people spending more time there watching your things? Or
yeah, I'd say YouTube has definitely been hit pretty badly. I would say mainly because I think people are tending to search for specific type of content, usually around COVID or election coverage, than many of the other platforms. And I think that is down to just the inherent nature of, like, you go to YouTube to search for what's going on and find the answer. Instagram, conversely, I think has been a little bit more boosted, I think, because we're able to be a little bit more topical and timely and stay with the conversation that's happening there. I'd say actually we've seen a nice growth on that platform. And then Facebook, you know, honestly, it's been a tricky one anyway for the last couple of years. And I think it just continues to be a little bit tricky. That platform in particular has been useful to kind of establish partnerships and establish partner shares to kind of drive audience there and drive discoverability, because it's inherently not as easy to discover video there. So finding those partners and finding those shares are more critical on that platform.
yeah, I would say, you know, something that I would share from PBS Nature's point of view is that in the past, they really haven't been reporting on news. You know, it's like all of these evergreen documentaries. But once, you know, COVID happened and there was a nature angle, you know, like its relation to wildlife, and the fires, especially last year, fires in Australia, were able to sort of quickly turn around a mini series. And those things have done really well for us. So I think if there is, at least for broadcast series or something that's traditionally more, we shoot 2 years ahead of when it premieres. If you can sort of shift and be nimble and cover the news when people are searching for it, that's one of my suggestions. Ariel, this question is interesting for you because how do you measure your success in the industry? How do you know? How do you tweak it?
Yeah, I want to choose like option E, none of the above. But I think that, I guess I don't usually think, I do think about like audience engagement and that kind of thing, but it's not usually how I measure at least the success of what I do. I think I tend to think of it a lot more of, just based on like the quality of work, or like whether or not I'm proud of it, whether or not I think it speaks to people. And I think it's a little bit more on the front end of making sure I find the projects in the first place that I really want to be a part of, and that I think, will reach audiences, whether that's because they're, about a really important topic or just because they're really exciting and fun. I think that both are really viable options. And yeah, so I think it has a lot more to do with that. And then on the other side, I also work really, as an art director, I work much more typically with, on movies that are usually shown in theaters. So like the last movie that I just worked on was Tenet, which has now been released in theaters in a lot of some places in the country.
Theaters.
It's been released. Yeah, I finally saw it at a drive-in movie theater this weekend. Thank God Atlanta has drive-ins, which is really fun.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so I guess there's also a weird metric of success there that you can't really, it's kind of a hard thing to measure right now because it's not really comparable to something that has happened before. Mm-hmm. And again, I'll leave it to the studio to measure their own success on that. Personally, I think it looked great and I'm really excited about it. So
I'm really excited to see it. Yeah.
So I'll go with my own metric of being proud of my work and excited about it there.
That's always a good one.
Yeah. That's what I got on that end.
Tiffany, what about you?
So what's interesting is when this pandemic first started, I was working with CBS primarily on news content. And so for that, there are lots of like very direct, right, metrics for success. But what's really interesting is, what's happening in the world and what's popular and what's happening in the world is news, and the news is what you cover. But everybody's covering the same news. So everybody's covering coronavirus, everybody is covering Black Lives Matter protests, everybody is covering the election and voting rights, everybody's covering the same events, March on Washington. So it is about tapping into your audience, number one, and understanding your audience and listening to that direct feedback. But number two, thinking about the audiences that are readily available that are now engaging with media in ways that they weren't before because maybe they didn't have the time to, right? Maybe some people are at home now who weren't at home before, have more free time. And figuring out how to pivot and to speak to those new viewers on the platforms where they're at. So that's the first portion. And some of these platforms, they seem like superficial, but when you look into it, there's a lot of depth. Like you brought up TikTok. So there's a lot of depth on TikTok. People are engaging on TikTok in ways you would not believe until you fall into the black hole that is TikTok. So from everything that's going on with like fighting for labor rights for farm workers during these fires, or the Black Lives Matter protests, or a lot of voting rights stuff on there. So people are so engaged in these spaces. So how do you tap into these spaces? And we did a lot of the stuff at Geo, figure out how you talk to people in their language on their platforms and respecting the platforms. And then now there's Vice. I'm like working with a great team of people who are creating a new show for Vice. And that shows a direct response to the topics and to the kind of media that has become popular, that a lot of people are talking about since COVID. And even then with the half-hour show, we are looking at TikTok and looking at the ways people are engaging around these conversations on TikTok to help us figure out creative ways to tell some of these stories. And so the metric for success is, number one, how do you cut through the noise? How do you end up being the person who tells the story in a way, the same story everybody else is telling, in a way that is so unique that people not only watch you, but engage with you, have a conversation with you, and stick with you throughout the duration of your show, for sure.
And can you tell us that secret? How do you cut through the noise? Give us the secret.
Sometimes I succeed and sometimes I don't. I think the most important part of figuring out how to cut through the noise is not the talking, not the creating, not the making, but the listening.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do a lot of listening, and especially in 2020, at the end of 2020 here, people understand that they all have a voice and they are using it. And a lot of the loudest voices that we hear now are people that nobody's engaged with ever. So I think that the way to cut through the noise is to talk to some of those people directly. So that's what we're trying to do. And when we fail, we learn from that. And then we apply that and we try it again. But I mean, the first step is like get lost in the black hole of TikTok and you will learn something for sure.
I think I've learned more on TikTok than all my years in college so far. Allie, what about you? What would you say?
Yeah, so I mean, doing traditional natural history, it's always such a tricky one because you only really find out after the fact when you get ratings back and you see how your show did. But I think that, you know, from a development standpoint, it's really important to understand the networks that you're developing content for and understanding their audience. And that's what can be really tricky, is because things change all the time. You know, National Geographic will want something different each year or each season. So it's about really adjusting to that and making sure that your development strategy is kind of in line with that. And it's also been really interesting with, you know, 2020, so much has changed in terms of the pandemic. But at the same time, there's also kind of this demand for diversity as well in the industry, and kind of adjusting your strategies for that has become really, really important. But yeah, overall, I think, you know, just really kind of being able to structure your development plan in a traditional, you know, production company, being able to structure that around your networks and their audiences is really vital.
Actually, you sort of got into our final question, which was inspired by you, Allie, from a different conference that we're working on together. But basically, this year, may it end soon, has given us quite a handful of punches to deal with. There's COVID, there's wildfires, there's, you know, racial inequality, which has always been here, but, you know, it's back in the front and center of America. So my last question and challenge for all of you is, how has 2020 shaped or changed these industries, and where do we go from here? So Allie, if you want to expand on what you said or add anything else, you can go first.
Yeah, sure. So like I was saying earlier, I think that there's an incredible opportunity, and, you know, hindsight is 2020. I think that we could have done a lot more in this space, in the natural history space specifically, over the past few years, but I think that there are great opportunities for growth. I know that National Geographic and in South Africa, NUF have incredible programs to kind of mentor young filmmakers. And I really think that we need to expand the industry, take risks. I think that that's kind of the biggest thing, is that we need to be able to, you know, stand up, use new people, let people learn, you know, have more people kind of have mentorship programs in place. That's always a huge help. But I think that, you know, the biggest thing is that when I'm developing shows now, we've obviously got to have strategies in place, lots of contingency plans in case things change with COVID. And it would be so much easier if I could just say, okay, you know, we have incredible crew up in Uganda, and we can do a film there right now. We don't need to send anyone up there. They can go into the field for 3 months and make a beautiful natural history film. And unfortunately, we just haven't given people the opportunities for that to be possible right now. And I think if we look into the future and we say, you know, in all of these countries that we film in, natural history is a global genre. So ultimately, all of these places should have natural history filmmakers. I think that there are great opportunities there. And I think that that's ultimately what we need to see this as. We shouldn't see it kind of as something that's holding us back. We should see it as a great opportunity for the future.
Good soundbite right there. I like that. Ariel, how about your industry? 2020. What has it changed? What will it bring in the future?
I guess I would kind of just go towards the industry as a whole, which I think the art department is like a subsect of. But I mean, for me, generally, you know, like representation in film and media has always been like a really important and I think vital, you know, piece of storytelling. And whether that's women, BIPOC, trans people, you know, just minorities in general, or just people that feel underrepresented in the current, you know, media sphere. And so I really hope that this time and this year has really, you know, lit a fire behind people's work. And hopefully, you know, we really see like good, positive, inspirational representation of all of these groups, both on screen and behind the camera. And I think that that's really important, and it's important that we all, you know, take it upon ourselves to help, you know, bring people into the fold and really make them a part of the process, and allow people to learn and allow people to be included and share their own stories. And I think that that's, you know, at every level. Yeah.
Yep, totally agree. Adam, what about you?
Yeah, I think that there's sort of this, there's been a dominance of like New York and LA for at least the areas that I've been working in, and maybe a few other cities, and those are like expensive places to live. And so if you're only hiring people who can live there, you're obviously limiting who you can hire, especially, you know, people who into these industries. And so I'm hopeful that, you know, remote work has been tough for our team, and there's no way around it, but like, it's also, we're doing it. So like, we're figuring out how to do it. I think that there's opportunities for us to expand where people work and can still be part of making this. And I think that that is just a very concrete thing that could help increase the kinds of voices that are involved. So I'm hopeful that the lessons we're learning about remote work can sort of translate into the post-COVID times, and lead to little, you know, people working all across the world from various places where they need to be.
Great. Tiffany?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is you've seen companies who are good at a couple of things be able to pivot really well. You know, companies that value thoughtful storytelling, inclusivity, adaptability, right? And other places that didn't do those things are trying to figure out how to do that. And I think that that's how you stay alive in this industry, period. We saw that before all of this with digital media and all the new platforms that came around, the people who were able to pivot, the people who had diverse voices on their teams. And that means diverse in so many ways, right? Not just race, but in so many ways. Those people were able to respond, who were willing to take risks and adapt, were able to respond. And people who were very stuck in their ways with the same kind of thinking, the same kinds of people thinking about, you know, how to solve the problem, couldn't come to solutions as quickly. And for me, I think that this is like an extension of that. I think it's important to talk about the fact that, you know, I'm a Black filmmaker, and the experience has been different for Black filmmakers, especially what is going on right now. It's not new to any of us, but there all of a sudden was this like desire for Black filmmakers, Black people in general to be on your team. It can't be because you're trying to fill a quota. It has to be because you are invested in those things that I just talked about. Adaptability, having a range of voices, reaching a range of people, being able to pivot, and caring about those stories and those people who are part of those stories. So for me, what I think, hopefully we've all learned, what I know that I've learned, what I already knew, but it just reinforced, is that you have to be really particular and smart about the teams that you build, about the stories you decide to tell, about who you decide to speak to, and about the authentic nature of what you're doing. It can't be performative. Like we've seen people have seen through all of that. They'll continue to see through it. The filmmakers who you ask to work on your projects, like me, we see through it. And the audiences who you're trying to reach will see through it. So I think that that's what it comes down to. I think this has forced our industry to think a little bit more about why we're creating the media we are, and who it is we're creating it for. And I say that that's a good thing. That's a great thing. Yeah.
100%. A little late, but better late than never.
Very late, but
yeah.
at least it's happening at all. Yeah.
And Anita, what about you?
Yeah, I think for us and for me in particular, just going off of what Tiffany was saying, that it's always been an issue that you want to address and make time for. And I think what's been refreshing is this year, my company included, has made the space and the time to make it a priority. Because so often I think you're overloaded with, going back to measurement a little bit, you're kind of overloaded and given the priorities of like, what's your KPI? How do you measure success? And in that success portion, you're not thinking about, diversity, equity, and inclusion. You're not, that's not part of the, company remit. And so having that now shifting and making it a priority has meant that, we're now leaning in a lot heavier on things like finding more diverse hosts, finding more diverse stories. We were already kind of beginning to source filmmakers more locally, and now I feel like we're kind of doubling down on that, not just because of the pandemic, but because of some of these diversity and equity and inclusion policies that we're rolling out across the company. And it's something that I feel, at least from where I'm standing in my company, like I feel hopeful that those will continue, and that we're now not just measuring success based on like, corporate KPIs, but actually on, the quality of storytelling, who we're showing on screen, the diversity of people on screen and off screen too. So yeah, I feel like it's been a much needed change, a much needed shift this year.
Yeah, and I think, the last thing I kind of want to impart in this panel is that all of these things, there's always space for your industry to be part of it and to be loud and outspoken about it. I think, with Black Lives Matter movement, like, I think natural history filmmakers might think, this doesn't affect me. But then, you see the incident with Christian Cooper in Central Park, where he's just bird watching. This is just a man trying to be in nature and being harassed. And out of that came Black Birders Week, which is phenomenal. If you haven't seen it, you should look it up. With the wildfires, like this affects everybody and our ability to breathe and the amount of insects and animals. And, with COVID, again, we can shut down wet markets that sell these animals, and sometimes illegally. So there is always a way to get involved and be on the right side of history in these things. So I would just implore everybody, even if you don't think it's part of your industry or your business, it is. And yeah, we're all learning how we can be better and be part of it. And I would love to thank our panelists for teaching us some of those ways. So thank you, Allie and Tiffany and Anita.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah, please.
You said that's really interesting, and I can't believe I didn't say this before. So the idea that we could have ever told natural history stories about this environment, stories about this planet, stories about the animals on it, the plants on it. The idea that we could have ever told any of those stories without considering indigenous people, Black and brown people, the people who are the origin of some of these stories in the first place, the people who've been the keepers of the planet and the earth. The idea that we could have ever eliminated those people in our stories or not been concerned about what was happening to the people who live in the places where we're trying to protect, who live alongside the animals that we're trying to protect, was ridiculous. And so I'm really glad that now people are understanding, like what you said, that not only is it like, we should be a part of this conversation, we are a part of this conversation, and telling stories about this land and this environment is tethered to the people who live on this earth and on in these environments. We were never removed. We were absolutely never removed. And so if we thought we were not telling the complete story in the first place. Yeah.
100%. 100%. And, people are stuck at home during COVID times. It really gives you a lot of introspective thinking time. And, specifically with our work, it's not just us as storytellers. Like, you really have to think of every single thing that goes into the animal or the plant or the animation that you're making. And that will just make it better. Might make your job harder, but it's worth it. So the last few minutes we have left here, I'd love to open it up to all of the panelists and see if they have any final comments or questions for each other.
I had a question for Adam. So making a show about a pandemic is probably hard enough, but I can't imagine how hard it is to make a show about a pandemic in the middle of the pandemic when we don't know a whole bunch about what's going on. And so I wonder what that process was like, because I do watch work. I love your work, you know that. But I was wondering what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I think the hardest part was trying to decide, what can we say, what will be accurate in 2 months, right? Because the production process, once we let go of it, it's still a month of color and, all this quality control stuff that has to happen. And so, we all lived through this. It moved so fast, and something that we were sure about 3 weeks ago was completely ridiculous. So we were living that those sort of revelations kept coming as we're trying to make sort of our show is called Explained, which is a bit of a highfalutin name. We're going to explain this whole thing to you. And so that was in the back of our minds the whole time was, what can we say that is just going to be true? And so we didn't go out on a limb. We did a whole episode about vaccines, which was very difficult because that news was changing every day. But I wasn't the main, I was the art director for that episode, but I wasn't the main reporter, and the reporters who worked on it did an amazing job of sort of sifting through everything. And it's been really great to see the experts that they found and talked to and spoke in very measured ways, just being correct since that point. It really held up. And I think that was just an incredible amount of research that they did to find those people. But yeah, so it was a lot of not going out on a limb, but also, after I said we don't think about our audience at all, I realized, of course, making that mini-series was sort of trying to anticipate where people would be and what they would be worrying about. And so I think the other thing that really guided us through that was, what were the questions we had, and what were sort of the central questions that we thought people would still have in a month about this crazy, scary thing that we're all experiencing. So that was sort of the general approach.
Did you have to come up with like special disclaimers, or have you had to, post anything about like updates or corrections or anything?
We haven't had to post any corrections.
Nice.
So that worked out. I mean, I think our audience was probably frustrated by some of what we made because we didn't go as far as, some headlines would or some news reports would. But I think we feel good about, people can still watch it now and get something out of it. So it's a trade-off.
Anyone else have other questions? Maybe one more?
I would actually like to hear generally from people kind of what you foresee the changes being more long-term in terms of the pandemic for each of you. I know that we all kind of work in such different environments, so it'd be really interesting to kind of hear from everyone on that.
Yeah, I could speak to that a little bit. I think I have a hope and what I actually think will happen, which are kind of different. But I think that one of the biggest things that I've noticed, at least coming back to production, is that, people, there is a sense of, internal conflict, or, you are a little bit more stressed just kind of as the day goes on and around other people. And there's too many things you have to worry about in addition to just doing the job that you usually do, which is, as we all know, is usually pretty stressful. So, I think that the attitude that I've experienced of people just being really understanding, and, allowing for, hopefully for things to take a little bit more time, or, that there are just some things that you can't do whereas usually people, I feel like the word from production or director would always just be, just get it done, just do it. And I think that the responses that I've gotten that have, been more understanding have been really helpful. And I would hope that that's the way we continue doing things, but I have also felt the absolute opposite effect. And I think that that's really where we're going to go, is just that, to me, it just feels like, the same expectations are going to be there, with all these difficulties that come in along the way, and that it's just going to, start coming down on everyone else, because at least for me, people tend to worry about the actors and the shooting crew a lot more, and it just really comes down on everyone else on the production side. And I hope that's not the case. On this one, people have been really good and understanding, but it's not everywhere.
And something that's been really interesting, I mean, on our side as well, is that we can't get production insurance against COVID. So I think that that's been kind of a big nightmare, and it's a lot of risk that suddenly falls on production companies' shoulders, because the broadcasters ultimately aren't really taking on that risk. So that's something that we've had, having people in the field now. So it's been quite interesting. I wonder if any of you guys had to deal with that with the productions that you're working on. Just me.
I don't think so.
I have, just on the other end, I guess.
And I think there are people in my organization who are worried about that I am blissfully unaware of. So, yeah.
I would say the same. I think we've had some experience with it, and then you're having to quickly try and pivot and figure out, a way around it to keep moving forward.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things like that kind of change in the long term and affect things like budgets. So
I've definitely had like a much smaller production that I was working on that the producers were having a really hard time figuring that out, so it just delayed the start of the production. So that was one thing. And then being a part of a bigger production, we do get, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that they've taken on so much responsibility, but we do get like new rules imposed on us like every week. Because they keep changing things and they keep wanting it to be safer and stuff, which is great. Often it, kind of starts to complicate the actual job, but at least we feel reasonably safe.
Yeah, sort of to a point that Adam had made earlier about like the jobs that are now available and the people that we can work with. Like one thing that has changed for me that I hope stays the same is that normally if I were yeah, a lot of the things that I would hire people for, they would have to live in DC, or at least close to DC, you know, because that's where I'm based, and that's where the places I was working were based. CBS, where I was working, was there. The office was there. So, or maybe you could live in DC and New York, you know, but if you were in Boston or if you were in Idaho or something, you could be the most talented person on the planet, but you would have had to move in order to work on the project, which limited who I could work with. And now that everybody's working from their homes, I'm able to work with me. For me, I look at resumes all over the place, and I know some people have reached out to me and they've said, you know, this is a great project, it's perfect for you, and normally you would have had to live in LA, but now it doesn't matter because we're all in our houses. So hopefully the ways in which we've been able to like reach out to people we've always wanted to work with, but location wouldn't let us do that. Maybe that is a thing that continues even after coronavirus. If there's a project that's like particular to somebody and they live across the country, I could still say, hey, do you want to work on this with me? Do you want to join this project? And it wouldn't matter that they weren't in DC. I think that that's one positive thing that hopefully maintains.
I was just going to say it's true. I think I remember having a conversation before the pandemic hit about whether we could ever fully do kind of remote production. And I remember thinking, no, there's no way we could ever do it. But I think the last few months has proved, yes, you absolutely can. And yes, you can have a remote director of photography and a producer in a different city and a director in a different city and work together and get a good result. Definitely there's teething problems and there's still learning curves, but just proving that out, I think, and seeing the results and learning at a pretty rapid pace, it makes you realize that moving forward, you know, there's so much more opportunity. I think, as both Tiffany and Ali mentioned, there's so much more opportunity for people in remote places to work with, you know, a brand like myself with who's based in San Francisco. We've worked with filmmakers in London, we've worked with filmmakers in South Africa, and even domestically across the US in places that we wouldn't have, you know, typically have worked with folks. So I think it could be a good change moving forward.
Yeah.
And I think just to echo.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think to echo what Tiffany said before is, you know, my hope and my dream and a hope and like, I think a reality that it may feel like a lot of access and accessibility is being cut off, but what it's really doing is providing it for people who may have not had it before. And I think that's such a beautiful learning from all of this madness and something that I'm going to cling on to. So
There's also this like cool thing that happens when you can no longer do things the way that you've always done them, right? So, and what happens, I think the word is like, you know, innovation. And I hope that that continues, right? Because we have been pushed to do things, we had no choice. If you wanted to keep on making content, you could absolutely not make content the way that you had been, or maybe you're one of the lucky people who's so good. But most of us had to change something. And I think in some of those changes, just in being willing to make changes at all, we've started to find some better ways to do things, or realize that even once we can go back to the way that we used to, there are some things we make that are made better by the ways that we've adapted, and we'll hold on to those things. And so just having to try something new, having to take the risk of failing, because what would have been worse than trying something new and failing would have been doing absolutely nothing because we couldn't do what we normally do. I think that has led to some great innovations, and some of the art that I've seen, not just like in our field, but across the board, some of the music that we've heard, some of the other kinds of art that we've seen, I think some of it is a lot more interesting than the stuff I was seeing before the pandemic. So maybe we like keep getting weird and trying cool new things, and maybe we get used to doing that. And I think that'd be awesome.
yeah, so thank you all again, Adam, Ariel, Anita, Allie, there's so many A's in here. And of course, Tiffany. I really appreciate you all being here and talking about this with me.
It was a blast. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank
for
you.
having us.